Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing for you Sorry We're Closed on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the wonderful Ollie Reynolds and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. To call a la mode's Sorry We're Closed a survival horror is certainly accurate in many ways, but it also does a disservice to just how unique and fresh this debut title really is. While it absolutely borrows a few elements from genre classics like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, including the obvious PlayStation 1 inspired visuals, Sorry We're Closed is unlike anything we've ever played before, and it's blinking marvelous. The basic premise sees you take on the role of Michelle as she grapples with her emotions over a bad breakup, whilst fending off a demonic entity known as the Duchess. Yeah, this game is absolutely brimming with angels and demons. Dan Brown would have a field day. The Duchess places a curse upon Michelle, one which will force her into a loving, all-worshipping relationship with the demon in just a few short days. You gain the power of the Third Eye, enabling you to peek behind the curtain of reality and glimpse an alternate world in which demons are made manifest. We're not just talking gross, zombified demons though. Sorry We're Closed features a wonderfully diverse cast, most of whom harbour a demonic or angelic side revealed via the Third Eye. Take Robin, for example, serving as Michelle's guide throughout the game. They look quite cool enough with their trapper hat and fur-lined leather jacket, but activate the Third Eye and suddenly they have horns and a swishy tail. It's something to look at. This is perhaps the most subtle transformation, however, as other characters morph into completely different versions of themselves, including a trio of businessmen who quite literally transform into Cerberus. The game is split between spending time in a small, bustling London borough where you can chat with your friends and acquaintances, and traversing demonic environments littered with enemies, locked doors, and puzzles, also known as survival horror. Focusing on the social elements first, though, Michelle can accept optional tasks from her friends, thus influencing the final outcome. Discovering which ending you wind up with is a solid incentive to spend as much time as possible talking with each and every character, but even if the game lacked this element, the writing and presentation are remarkable enough to keep you invested in its world by themselves. Each location, including a music store and a nightclub, is brimming with color and personality, with funky, catchy music playing in the background, all bolstered by instant visual changes initiated by the Third Eye. The good news is that you can spend as much time as you like with the game's social elements before progressing the story. You can either hightail it to your main goal straight away if you wish, or lose yourself in quirky drama for hours on end. We'd recommend not powering through the game as fast as possible though, since a lot of the horror presented is directly tied into Michelle's life and the relationship she has with her peers. The sequences in which you're alone and fighting off against ferocious demons feel incredibly reminiscent of vintage survival horror. You've got fixed camera angles, puzzles in which you combine items and activate them with in-game objects, and of course lots and lots of creepy enemies. The main difference here, however, is how you take on your foes. Starting with merely an axe, Michelle soon finds herself in possession of a pistol and a shotgun. Aiming your weapons shift the perspective into first-person mode, and here you can either shoot your enemies from a distance and slowly chip away at their health, or you can wait for them to come into close range, activate the Third Eye, and aim directly at the demons' hearts. Some smaller enemies can be wiped out immediately this way, whereas others have hearts that shift with their bodies, requiring 3, 4, 5, sometimes more shots in order to properly vanquish them. Aiming carefully and blasting hearts without missing a shot is highly encouraged, since doing so will charge up a special ability known as the Heartbreaker. This is essentially a super-powered weapon with a single shot that you can blast and eradicate any normal enemy in one go, whilst drastically cutting down the health of boss characters. There are also some enemies that can only be stunned with normal weapons, meaning if you want to kill them proper and not have to deal them when you have to inevitably go back into a room, you're gonna have to use the Heartbreaker. And when you do decide to activate it, the whole world freezes and you get a slick animation in which Michelle carefully aims aims the gun towards the silhouetted enemy against a bright, bold pink background. It's very cool indeed. When we encountered our first couple of enemies and started aiming in first person, something did feel a little bit off. Aiming was a little bit twitchy with the right analog stick, and it just didn't work all that well. We needed more fluidity, more precision. We needed gyro controls. Our hearts sank briefly as we opened the options menu, dreading that the developer had overlooked this crucial control option, but thankfully it may be a little bit hidden, but gyro is here, it's present, it's correct, and it makes combat encounters infinitely more enjoyable. We'd highly recommend activating this from the very start and cranking the sensitivity up for the optimum experience. Me personally, crank it up to the max. There is another optional change you can implement within the menu: tank controls. By default, you have a modern control scheme, but tank controls make the game feel authentically quote-unquote survival horror. They work well enough, but turning left or right can actually make Michelle walk backwards a lot of the time, perhaps an issue with sensitivity or something like that, but since it can't be altered, it can prove frustrating. And as such, this is actually one of the few examples of the fixed camera genre in which modern controls feel better, although this will come down to personal preference, and we're thankful that Alamode at least included it as an option. If there's one thing that we think is missing from Sorry We're Closed, it's voice acting. To be clear, the game works perfectly fine without it. The dialogue boxes are accompanied by a satisfying little sort of typewriter sound effect most of the time, but if the developer ever feels the need to revisit this project and give it the Disco Elysium treatment, that would be very welcome indeed. It would give the characters that extra boost of personality and really make the beautiful, ethereal world sing even more. Finally, it's worth noting that the Switch version is capped at 30 frames a second, compared to higher frame rates seen on the original PC release. It's not the kind of game that necessarily feels worse because of it, but if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, it's worth keeping in mind. Similarly, the initial load into the game can be quite lengthy, but once you're in one of the survival horror areas especially, transitioning between most environments is reasonably swift, with slightly lengthier loads when you're in the social settings. Sorry We're Closed is one of the most unique and memorable survival horror games we've ever played. The juxtaposition of bright colors and quirky characters against moments of true terror is really unlike anything else we've seen before, and the first-person combat mechanics manage to feel immensely satisfying and empowering while still retaining a sense of creeping dread. This is a world we won't soon forget, and unlike the protagonist's desire to shy away from love, we suspect you'll fall immediately head over heels for this one. Sorry We're Closed, you're getting a 9 out of 10 from us. You've reached the end of the review. That means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and whilst I do broadly agree with Ollie in so many ways, there are some areas where I actually have the opposite opinion. Oh. One of those lines towards the end of the review, the fact that the combat makes you feel empowered, I would argue the total opposite. You know, the combat is there to make you survive. I would say it makes you feel completely disempowered. And it's great. You'll walk into a room, you'll be hearing something, you won't know what it is, and the camera doesn't let you see what it is, and then suddenly this shambling thing comes into view and you go, nah, and you have to run back and you go into first person mode, and it's not quite snappy, like it's not instant, and that's absolutely necessary in this instance, because it means you've got to like plan out where you're gonna be, and you're back and you go and you say, oh, get back, and you're trying to use the third eye to stun them if you can, and suddenly then there's two more. Oh, it's brilliant, and it's just like it's trousers wettingly good. The characters are absolutely superb in this as well. I don't think there's any two characters that feel even slightly similar. I mean, maybe if you really broke them down, but seriously, all of these characters really stand on their own, and you never forget which one did something, or did this person do this, or did this person do this. It never comes up. You know from memory, without even having to think about it, what character did what. I've loved my time with the game. I really, really have. But I do have to express just a little bit of disappointment, having come from the original Steam demo that I played before I played the Switch version. From a technical perspective, I think the game stumbles a bit on Switch. Now, I'm not talking about the visuals or anything like that. Those are absolutely intentional. I'm talking about the weirdly long load times, particularly in the social situations, where you can have control arrested from you for about 15 seconds seconds sometimes, just because you're going into a single room. It just doesn't make any sense. In the survival horror areas with all the enemies and stuff like that, the loads are almost instant. It feels absolutely perfect. But in the social scenarios, it's just like, why is it taking so long to load? You know, I don't think there's any good reason why that's happening. Maybe it's an Unreal Engine thing. I don't know, but it's weird and kind of pace-breaking. Also, the frame rate being 30 frames a second, I don't see any good reason why a game that looks like this, and again, I love the style of the game, I'm not knocking it, I think it looks great, but it is simple in its visuals and in the assets that it loads. I don't know why it's capped at 30. It just doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe there's something going on underneath the bonnet that I don't understand, and that's almost certainly the case. But it's not satisfying to be forced into 30 FPS. In a way, it's arguably more true to older games, but I think that should be an option in the menus. Like, if you could turn on, like, a 20 frames a second mode, I think that would be really cool. But turning it on, you know, sort of, I don't see why this game isn't 60. But having said all that, if I take off my critique hat, I did forget about it pretty damn quickly. But putting my critique hat back on, it's a little disappointing that it doesn't run better on Switch. But this is one of the first games in years that has made me feel genuine dread and terror, so it can't be knocked for that. Well done. It's an excellent, excellent game.